The Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 is great. Amazing, even. I would wager that objectively speaking, this is without a doubt the best smartphone I have ever had in my possession, and I'm not sure it's that close. But it's also $2,000 US, and as unbelievably cool as the Fold 7 is, no matter how surreal it might feel to unfold this seemingly normal phone into this ultra-thin 8-inch tablet, I'm not convinced that the Fold 7 is great enough to be truly worth buying. At least for the vast majority of users out there. That doesn't mean I think you shouldn't buy it, but let's be clear here, this is a luxury smartphone. If you're in the market for a phone that costs this much money, or are wanting and willing to splurge on something like this, to get a phone that stands out from the crowd and feels like a genuinely new, fresh experience, by all means, I don't think you can do better than the Galaxy Z Fold 7. It is so great. It's just not great enough to be worth buying for the average consumer, even those who maybe could afford it if they really wanted to, not when you can get basically everything you need on a top-end flagship for like half the price. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I've been using the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 for a couple weeks now, along with the Galaxy Watch 8, which I'll speak briefly on later. And if this phone wasn't just a review model that I had to send back, and I had the option to keep it, and maybe even switch to it full-time from my current iPhone 15 Pro Max, man, I would be pretty darn tempted. But even after using it for 2 weeks, would I go out of my way to spend $2,000 on this phone? No, I would not. Convincing me to switch from that walled garden Apple ecosystem would be difficult enough to begin with, and as much as I do love using this phone, I just don't love it enough to take the plunge for myself. If you're watching this also as an iPhone user, I'd say it's probably more worth waiting for Apple to make their own foldable next year, even if it'll cost just as much money if not even more than the Fold 7. However, there's no denying how spectacular this phone feels, and if you want to move on from Apple as it is right now, you're not getting a much better device than this one here. I've got a lot of praise for how far Samsung has brought these foldables over the years. This to me feels like maybe the first time that a foldable is almost just as practical as any other normal slab smartphone. It's so thin that folded up it's about the same thickness as my current iPhone. While there still are some compromises being made, which we'll talk about in this review, there's so much novelty here that I think for the type of user this phone might appeal to, any downsides are minor enough that they probably won't matter. This phone is worth buying for those who have the money to spend on a phone like this and want it. However, you're really not gaining a ton of utility in any practical sense. The larger unfolded display might be a help in productivity, but it's unlikely to be massively more useful than your typical slab smartphone with their single basic displays. With a typical flagship smartphone, you're looking at a device that's maybe half the price, is capable of accomplishing the same tasks, and won't make you worry about durability issues down the line. But you're also looking at a phone that quite frankly won't be nearly as exciting, fun, or novel. A phone that will feel awfully familiar to every other smartphone we've been using since the first iPhone. The Fold 7, even if it may have flaws, does feel amazingly original. It's a breath of fresh air in a package that has never ever been this good. Using the Fold 7 feels like you're holding the future of smartphones in your hands, even if it ultimately may not end up being the future, and I'll link a video I did talking about that in the description below if you're interested after this. But for now, we're gonna get this review started with the design and displays, undoubtedly this phone's greatest strength. And ultimately, today we aim to answer the big question. Is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 really worth buying? The Fold 7 is insanely thin. It's one of the first things I noticed about this phone, how even folded up, it's roughly the same thickness as my iPhone 15 Pro Max. If you were to glue this phone shut permanently, it would still operate as a normal slab smartphone just fine, and I think that's a really huge upside of this generation compared to previous folds. There's no compromise when it comes to the physical size and form factor, there's no extra bulk, and when you unfold the Fold, man, it gets crazy thin. It barely even fits the USB-C port at all. I don't know how they could possibly make this phone any thinner without removing that port entirely. And that blue color, man, I absolutely love it. It really stands out and just pops compared to the natural titanium I've been rocking for the last couple years. There are silver and black options though, if you would prefer, as well as a Samsung.com exclusive mint color, apparently. That one's nice too, but I'm all about that blue for sure, it's just gorgeous. For security, we have a fingerprint sensor built into the power button on the side of the phone, and it's both fast and reliable. Didn't give me any issues aside from it did take me a little bit to get used to the placement of the button itself. It's a bit small. Of course, there are some face unlock options and so on as well, but I'd say the fingerprint sensor is the way to go. But back to how thin this phone is. It's also surprisingly light at only 215 grams. That's 12 grams lighter than the iPhone 16 Pro Max, by the way. The only real annoyance with this form factor that I have is how ridiculously large the camera bump feels, and how its protrusion makes for the worst camera wobble on any smartphone I've ever used. But this phone isn't one you'll likely be using when it's laying flat on a desk anyways. It's meant to be held, so I don't consider this to be the biggest deal. I suppose the other concern would be durability. With a phone this thin, in combination with the whole folding gimmick, it does end up feeling far more fragile than your typical smartphone. The Fold 7 does still feel solid though, with its aluminum frame and glass backing that allows for wireless charging. And we've also got IP48 water and dust resistance versus your standard IP68 resistance on phones like the S25 Ultra. The 4 refers to dust resistance, the 8 is for water, so while this phone should survive a drop in the toilet no problem, using it in a dusty environment might be risky. That is a notable downside of this whole design. And I will be honest, bringing this phone out and about always felt a bit nerve-wracking compared to my normal phone, but there's a couple justifiable reasons for that. For one, this isn't my phone, it's just a review model that I need to send back and I don't want to damage it. 2, this is a $2,000 phone, and anything that costs that much and fits in your pocket is going to keep you on your toes. 3, I wasn't using any case or screen protector, and that's something you would definitely want with an expensive phone like this. I'm sure that realistically Samsung's put a lot of work into making the Fold 7 as durable as it can be, but a foldable like this is always going to be a lot more fragile than a slab phone no matter how well it's designed. That's just kind of how things are. Plus, it also just feels more fragile, so you're going to treat it differently subconsciously. Luckily, there are plenty of cases out there to choose from, and while they might end up removing a lot of that crazy thinness, it should also help with the camera wobble being reduced. Plus, don't forget the previous Fold was significantly thicker, so even with a case on this phone, I don't imagine it'll be too bulky. Getting a good screen protector is also super important. I think particularly for that unfolded display, I would be worried about scratches, especially if some dirt or dust got on the inside and then you close the thing. You want some protection there. Whatever you get, it's gotta help at least a little. And why don't we go ahead and turn to those displays, which are definitely the main event here. Historically, I think it's fair to say that foldables have had a few common problems that have really held them back, and while Samsung hasn't completely solved everything, the Fold 7 absolutely brings us closer than ever. We've already established how thin this phone is, so that's one big hindrance dealt with. Another couple big issues though. The front displays on these phones can sometimes feel lackluster, the one on the Fold 6 was too narrow, and the crease on the unfolded display can be a real eyesore. Thankfully, I think Samsung has nailed both of these components. Let's start with the front. We're looking at a 6.5-inch 120Hz 1080p AMOLED display with relatively thin bezels and a small hole punch notch at the top center of the screen. It's sharp, vibrant, everything you would expect and want from a normal smartphone screen. The bezels are a bit thicker than say an S25 Ultra, and the resolution isn't going to be as high, but it still looks fantastic. And that buttery smooth 120 frames per second makes everything you do feel satisfying and fluid. Thanks to the compact form factor, this phone feels so darn normal when folded up that it's easy to get engrossed in what you're doing and not even think to actually open the phone. And instead, I found myself sometimes just using it like any other smartphone. But of course, this isn't any other smartphone, it's a Fold, and unfolding it reveals the primary display that you'll probably want to use whenever possible. Here we have that big and bold 8-inch 120Hz AMOLED panel with a resolution of 1968 by 2184, making for a nearly but not quite square aspect ratio. 368 pixels per inch on a screen of this size means the picture looks really sharp and crisp, and the colors just pop like with any Samsung AMOLED. There's a lot of tech that's allowing this thing to fold. The screen isn't made of like the standard glass you would see on a normal display, and it does feel a bit more plasticky than I would like, but it still feels pretty good to the touch and just awesome to use, honestly. I've been working on a Note 3 review, and it would have been kind of interesting to see the S Pen with this thing. I feel like it would make sense given the size of the display, but you need an S25 Ultra if you want that. This phone is not compatible with the S Pen at all, and I'm guessing it was at least in part so they could make the phone as thin as possible. Not a huge deal, but worth mentioning. Having a normal feeling phone that can turn into an 8-inch beast whenever you want it to, this thing almost feels like a sleeper build. Like, it's crazy just how compact and seamless the whole device is. The tech on show here is some of the most impressive we've ever seen in any smartphone, period. Samsung's definitely flexing their muscles a bit with this one, and I'm all for it, even if I've also got my fair share of complaints because it is physically impossible for me to be happy with anything at any time. Yeah, of course I have to nitpick. Though I'm not sure all of these complaints are nitpicks so much as legitimate downsides to this type of phone, but okay, let's look at the upsides first. Obviously, this display is gorgeous, and it gets pretty bright too. 2600 nits. The bezels are quite thin, especially considering what we're looking at here, and the infamous crease that has always been a point of contention for prospective buyers is now, in my opinion, practically a non-issue. Yeah, the crease is still there, but looking at the phone head-on, you really can't see it. If you look at it off-angle or it catches the light, it is very much visible, but it still didn't bother me in those cases, and the vast majority of the time, it perfectly blended into the experience, which is exactly how it should be on a phone like this. You can feel it if you run over it with your finger, but I didn't find myself needing to touch that part of the screen much anyways. There is the practical question of using a screen this big. Depending on the size of your hands, it may not be that comfortable, and you're definitely going to want to use two hands with this screen, but there's also some nice optimization here and there, like with how the keyboard is positioned to make it easy to type without needing to stretch your thumbs too far. For the most part, this does feel like just using an oversized Android phone, but it does great with multitasking or anything that's better with a bigger screen. I'd be very curious to see how Apple would implement things when they make their own foldable, because I feel like there could be a lot more potential in how some of this could work and function, but I didn't run into too many issues when unfolded. And we'll talk a little bit more about the experience later on. Of course, again, the unfolded display doesn't feel as premium or solid as the main glass display on the outside. There's a crazy amount of tech here making this whole folding gimmick work, but it's not going to be as durable or robust as a normal glass screen. It's a fingerprint magnet, absolutely more prone to scratching or damage, might be more reflective, and it has a bit of an odd rainbow swirliness look going on too if you catch it at the right angle. While this phone basically turns into a mini tablet, the screen doesn't feel as good or solid as an actual tablet would. That being said, Samsung's still come a really long way here, and it's probably about as good as it can possibly get in 2025. Mostly eliminating the crease is a huge step in the right direction, and any downsides from the foldable display tech is minor enough that they didn't really bother me too much, aside from again how the whole thing just feels like it's a bit more on the fragile side. I'd say these are worthwhile trade-offs for being able to turn your 6.5-inch smartphone into an 8-inch mini tablet, though there are some choices Samsung made here that I think are questionable at best, namely with that hole punch notch placement. Previously, Samsung had put the selfie cam under the display, where it could still be visible if you looked closely enough, but practically made for one big seamless immersive screen. However, the quality of that selfie camera wasn't so great, which is probably why they opted to not bother hiding it this generation. And sure, the quality of this camera is pretty good, and I can live with a hole punch notch, but why the heck did they have to put it right here? It sorta does make sense when holding the phone like this. It's like you're basically using two phones at once side by side. You can even set up two apps to be displayed like this, which is cool. But when you turn the phone sideways, as you'll do when you want to watch video due to the aspect ratio, that notch is now really aggressively cutting into your content. You can go into settings and hide it, but all this does is put in a black bar and squish down the actual content, so it's not something I would consider a legitimate solution personally. This just feels like a really lazy choice on Samsung's part, and I don't understand why they couldn't simply move the camera into the top corner instead. Am I missing something here? Let me know in the comments if there's a big reason they shouldn't do that, but just move it out of the way from where video and any other main content is going to be. It's really not that hard. But no, it just sits there in the middle, and it's genuinely frustrating to me. And despite the size of this phone, if you were thinking it would be awesome to watch Netflix or YouTube on, I'd say think again, even not considering the hole punch notch. The more square-ish aspect ratio makes this less than ideal for video, especially if it's filmed at a 2:1 resolution like my own content. Obviously, using picture-in-picture can be a fantastic experience though, so if you're someone who likes to watch stuff while doing something else, then this probably will be great for video. Or with the flex mode, you can turn the phone into almost like a little laptop, which is pretty neat. I do think the functionality surrounding the folding gimmick is still a bit undercooked, particularly when it comes to third-party apps. But all in all, I mainly see this form factor as an absolute positive. Using a phone like this for spreadsheets, or multitasking really anything. Maybe you're writing out an email with another app open at the same time. Whatever it is you might be doing, having more space is almost always going to be a boon to productivity, and that's where the Fold 7 really shines. You also could just have a bigger screen for gaming if that's what you're into, and I'm sure there's plenty more use cases you could come up with. I think my favorite thing to do was turning this into a Nintendo DS. Like, this is genuinely pretty awesome. No, it's not that practical. You wouldn't actually play with it folded like this for too long, I don't think, since the phone will sit like this, but it tends to like to kind of unfold. But I don't care, it looks really cool and it's fun. While the novelty presented with the Fold 7 really can't be understated, I do want to emphasize that it's not something that will last forever. The longer I used the Fold 7, the more I got used to the folding and the less impressive and fun it began to feel. This is going to be a natural part of using any new product. That initial excitement and hype might carry the experience in the beginning, but it's how you feel about it after all that wears off that will give you a more accurate picture of what the device or product is like. Even after 2 weeks, unfolding the Fold 7 still felt magical, but it was far less so than when I first got it. Though it was always entertaining for me to show the phone off to friends and family to see their reactions, as people who've never before used a foldable smartphone are kind of blown away by something like this. And why wouldn't they be? It's really cool and a great topic of conversation. That high price tag ensures there's really not that many foldable smartphones out in the wild yet, even after many years of them being on the market. And at least until Apple makes their own or prices drop dramatically, I don't see that changing anytime soon. So if you get one of these, you're going to stand out from the crowd, and hey, there's nothing wrong with that. What I want to get at here though is that if you purchase this phone, you should expect to get accustomed to that folding gimmick to the point that it won't feel too much different to you than using any other smartphone. That excitement's going to wear off eventually. The question is, will you still find that larger display actually genuinely useful? Is it something that might aid you in productivity? Or in the very least, do you think it's still something you'll want enough to be worth $2,000 even after the rose-tinted glasses fade? These are the questions to ask, because as unique, premium, and well-built as this phone really does feel, representing the best foldables have ever had to offer, there is still going to be compromise compared to phones half its price. Durability, of course, is going to be a big one, and photography is another area where if a good camera is what you most want out of your smartphone, a different flagship is probably the way to go, though the Fold 7 is still one of the best phones on the market for sure. I'm not going to focus too much on the photography because firstly, I'm really not an expert, but also because honestly, I'd say almost any flagship phone from the last few years can take fantastic photos, and this phone, it's not an exception, although there is a little bit of compromise here that comes with the form factor. I think it's fair to say that for $2,000 you would expect this phone to take photos probably every bit as great as Samsung's biggest flagship in the Galaxy S25 Ultra, a phone that starts at $1,300 US, which is crazy expensive, but still $700 cheaper than the Fold. But that's not really the case. The S25 Ultra is better in the photography department, even if the results I found from the Fold 7 were still really strong. In the very least, we do get the same main wide 200 megapixel lens on the Fold 7 that's also on the S25 Ultra, and that is the lens I found producing the best results consistently. But first, let's talk selfies. There are two dedicated selfie cameras, a 10 megapixel wide lens on the front display, and then another 10 megapixel ultra wide lens on the unfolded display. The big benefit to not having that under display invisible selfie camera setup anymore is that the quality should be significantly better than what previous Folds were capable of. And there's also a third, more noteworthy option for selfies, using that main 200 megapixel lens. If you open the camera on the front display, then hit this button on the top left, the phone will prompt you to unfold it, thus positioning the main camera to act as a selfie camera, which is pretty cool and is likely to provide the best shot, though I would argue that 200 megapixels might capture just a little bit too much detail in my face. It's a bit awkward to do this, but it's worth mentioning as a cool upside of having a foldable. So let's take a look at those rear-facing sensors protruding from that massive camera bump. We've got again that 200 megapixel main wide lens along with a 10 megapixel 3x zoom telephoto lens and 12 megapixel 0.6x zoom ultra wide for good measure. Like with most smartphones with multiple camera lenses, you'll get the best results with the main wide sensor, but it's still really nice to have this level of versatility and quality across all of the lenses. If you want the best possible photos, the S25 Ultra is going to be a better buy. It brings that 50 megapixel 5x zoom periscope lens, which is absent here, and it has a 50 megapixel ultra wide as well, which should no doubt be better than the 12 megapixel ultra wide on the Fold 7. But this all being said, I mean, look at these pictures. It's hard to say they're anything but great. While you are potentially compromising a bit in photography compared to a non-folding flagship, I think the cameras here are still more than good enough that it doesn't feel like a reason to purposely avoid buying this phone, unless photography is in fact the most important part of a smartphone to you personally. Video can be filmed in up to 8K 30, which is probably completely pointless to do. The examples I have here were filmed in 4K, which is a far more reasonable resolution, and I gotta say the results were pretty darn solid. The stabilization felt pretty good, even when I was a bit shaky at time holding this phone with only one hand. I broke my arm a few weeks back, so I've got limited use out of my right hand right now, but this footage looks stable anyways, so I'm happy with that. For photo taking compared to my 15 Pro, I'll let you be the judge, but I was surprised by how different they sometimes were. Like, look at these mason jars here. The picture is way more blue on the 15 Pro, despite these being taken only moments apart. I do appreciate how sharp and vibrant the Fold 7's pictures are, and it held up well even indoors in less than ideal lighting situations. I was pretty happy with a lot of these photos, like I got this one of a bee by some flowers, but yeah, again, I'm not a photography expert. All I ask is, do these photos look good to my relatively untrained eyes? And are the results consistent? The answer is yes, absolutely. And so I'm comfortable asserting that this is the kind of camera that I think is more than good enough to satisfy most people. I do think it would be fair to expect better for $2,000, considering that the S25 Ultra is better and is $700 less, but the reality is most of that cost is of course coming from the folding gimmick. And it's one heck of a gimmick, so maybe you'll get some better photos in the right scenario with the S25 Ultra, but the Fold 7 still absolutely holds its own in the photography department. Naturally, the Fold 7 also has the power to back all of this up. We're looking at the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset with either 12 gigs of RAM with the 256 or 512 gig model, or 16 gigabytes of RAM with the 1 terabyte model. At $2,000, you would expect the best possible specs, and we do have that here, at least mostly. The storage space only starting at 256 gigs for a phone of this caliber does feel a little bit cheap to me personally. Sure, it's probably enough for most users, but we're talking a $2,000 phone here. I don't think 512 gigs would be unreasonable as the entry-level option. And what's crazy too is that there was already a sale that I saw prior to the launch that had the 512 gig option at the same price that the 256 gig model costs now. So I don't know why they didn't just price these things that way to begin with. But whatever, as it stands now, you're looking at an extra $120 for 512 gigs and an extra $420 if you want the 1 terabyte model, along with the 16 gigabytes of RAM. I suppose it gets to the point in pricing where money becomes kind of meaningless anyways. I mean, is there really a big difference between $2,000 and $2,100? I don't know. And personally, I would end up probably going for the 512 gig option. It's not that much more, and 12 gigs of RAM is plenty for everything I'm personally doing on my phone. And the Fold 7 is fast, as it should be. It'll need that power for all the multitasking you might want to do with its big display. Or gaming is a pretty great experience too. The battery here is the same size as what was in the Fold 6 at 4,400 mAh, even in spite of how much thinner this phone is, so that's pretty impressive. Actual battery performance is going to vary, but I found the phone lasting me a day or two no problem, even on days with heavier usage and video streaming. The phone charges fairly quickly too, with the right adapter. The battery life here isn't going to be stellar compared to any other flagship smartphone, but it doesn't feel like a downgrade to me either, so I'm pretty happy with it. There are some settings as well to keep your battery healthy for longer, and it's a good idea to use those if you want to use this phone for a long time. And in the very least, Samsung will be supporting it with updates for the next 7 years, so the Fold 7 has a long life ahead of it. Tough to say how well it'll hold up throughout that period of time. I'd suspect the durability in the long term might be a question mark, as it often has been with foldables in the past, but if you take good care of your phone, I think the specs inside will keep it fast and spiffy for many years to come. The hardware here is clearly elite, and for the most part represents the best of what the Android market currently has to offer, as it should for $2,000. But all this doesn't mean much if the actual software and experience doesn't also live up to the price tag. We need to talk more about what it's actually like to use this thing, and whether or not that gimmick is worth an extra $1,000 over your typical flagship. For a minute here before we get into more talking about the experience using the Galaxy Z Fold 7, I do want to briefly talk about the Galaxy Watch 8, which I was also sent from Samsung. Feel free to skip ahead if you're not too interested, timestamps are in the description below. But the Watch 8, I've been using it off and on over the past couple weeks, and thus far, while I've liked it fine enough, I'll be honest here, I do prefer my Apple Watch. There are some things I really like about the Watch 8, and I do think it's a pretty stellar smartwatch, but there's just a few little things I don't like so much compared to what I'm currently used to. If I were to switch to Samsung full time, however, undoubtedly I would just go for this watch. It is really darn solid, and starting at $350 for the 40mm option I have here. The larger 44mm is only $30 more, so I would definitely recommend that one if your wrists are a bit on the larger size. It's the one I would personally go for myself, but this one fit fine enough for review purposes. Having the watch face be more circular rather than square is what most sets this apart from Apple Watch, and there is some genuine upside to it. Mainly style. I think it looks more like a normal watch, and that's going to to appeal to some people. But at the same time, I can't help but feel that having corners, like you would in a more square design, doesn't really add too much in the way of bulk, and can also provide more information on the watch face without feeling cramped and cumbersome. Basically, I think having a more square display versus a circular one makes more sense since you can fit more on it, practically speaking. But I also think the circle might be more attractive for certain users, so it's probably a wash, and I don't think there was any lack of information on the screen to be sure. The actual experience is different from my Apple Watch, but it was intuitive enough for me to figure it out pretty quickly, and there are a lot of similarities. The workout stuff seems pretty good. I had my friend wear it when we were out hiking. I wanted to wear my Apple Watch to record the workout as normal for myself, so otherwise I would have worn it, but it seemed for him to give very accurate, consistent readings, just as you would hope for. The always-on display is nice to have. The software feels smooth and spiffy, which was actually a nice contrast from my now quite old and often leggy Series 5 Apple Watch. The battery was easily enough to get a day's usage out of it, and it charges pretty quickly, so you don't necessarily have to charge it every night, so long as you plop it on there approximately once every day or two. What I really wasn't a fan of was, of all things, the haptics. This watch vibrates far less subtly than my Apple Watch. My Series 5 feels like it's giving me a nice little poke on the wrist, whereas the Watch 8 feels like it has a much cheaper vibration motor, akin to lower cost Androids or older smartphones. This might seem really nitpicky if you don't actively already use an Apple Watch, but it was something I noticed immediately, and while I would get used to it, it just doesn't feel as refined or comfortable. There are a couple other models of Galaxy Watch, but on the whole, I do think this smartwatch is just a really solid buy if you're purchasing a Samsung phone to begin with. If you're on the iPhone side, then get an Apple Watch. It's really as simple as that. This was a nice change of pace for me to change things up, but I'm pretty happy to stick with what I have for the time being. So to summarize, the Watch 8 is great, but probably only worth getting if you're a Samsung user anyways. If you've got a Galaxy phone, perhaps even a Fold 7, I don't think there are many better options than this watch, so why not go for it? And let's go ahead and turn back to actually using the Fold 7 and the experience there. Finally, we come to the final segment of this review, my personal thoughts on the actual experience using the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7, and of course, whether or not it's all worth it. Don't forget what we're looking at here. There's two sides to this story. Number one, is this a great phone? And number two, is it great enough to really be worth $2,000 US? Number one is easy. Of course this is a great phone. As I said earlier, the novelty did fade the longer I used it, but it still felt so fun and fresh and different from any phone I've ever used before. There's nothing more satisfying than unfolding this device and then snapping it shut. The build is so premium, so refined, so polished, but there's still not a lot of practical usage that I found comes with a larger screen, at least to the point that spending an extra $700 to $1,000 could be worth it for your average user. Yes, the bigger screen is going to make for better productivity and multitasking, if that's the kind of user you are. Yeah, it'll be fun for gaming or watching YouTube and scrolling through social media at the same time. There's plenty of benefit to having a bigger screen, but for most people, I just don't think there'll be enough to warrant spending this much money. Not when you could pay half the price for a phone that does everything the Fold 7 can, just on a smaller, more straightforward single screen. This phone feels delicate, but it also feels amazing. It feels like the future, but it also feels like it needs more improvements made to the software to take advantage of the form factor. Third-party apps are hit and miss. Apps like Instagram and TikTok don't feel properly optimized for this screen, and there are some apps that force you to close and reopen them if you need to switch to the front display, which is a bit annoying. The hole punch notch really gets in the way and completely turned me off from wanting to watch YouTube or Netflix on this thing, unless I was doing something else at the same time. Yeah, you can watch in the flex mode or something, but like this really isn't that practical. I'd say it's worth dealing with some of these downsides in order to have a phone this cool, but like with everything else on here, as soon as you bring up the price, my tune changes pretty quickly. For $2,000, I need the phone to be perfect for me to want to buy it. I need it to have something that you just can't get anywhere else, and not just that, but something I feel like I really actually need. And I don't need this, I just don't. I really like it, heck I would say I even want it, but I don't need it. Samsung's One UI skin on top of Android here seems pretty solid. I've never been a huge fan of Samsung software, but I found myself getting accustomed to it very quickly. I didn't dislike it. Plus, Android always offers a ton of freedom in how you can make the experience your own, which I do really like. There's plenty of AI stuff built in here, but to be honest, I didn't really bother messing with it much. It's gonna be about the same as every other phone anyways. Having two vertical apps side by side is awesome. It's like having two phones at once. Opening this thing up feels magical, but no matter how great it all might be, it's still too expensive for me to properly recommend buying. Is the Fold 7 really worth it? No, I don't think it is. Unless, and this is key, you really want one. Yeah, I know, bold statement there, but if you can afford a phone like this and the Fold appeals to you, I'd say go for it. Foldables have never been anywhere close to as great as they are right now with this device, and that makes this about the perfect time to jump on board. They've ironed out a lot of the issues that have held these things back for years. The Fold 7 is a huge leap forward for this tech, and while I can't say I think it's necessarily the future of smartphones as a whole, it sure does make me wonder while I'm actually using it. The Galaxy Z Fold 7 is a luxury smartphone. Like I said in my previous video about if foldables are the future, it's like buying a brand new Honda Civic versus a Mercedes-Benz. Both cars are going to get you from A to B and accomplish the same goals, but one of them is going to be a whole lot fancier and a whole lot more expensive. It's the same thing looking at a regular flagship or the Galaxy Z Fold 7. If you're in the market to splurge on a smartphone, and $2,000 definitely equates to a splurge in my eyes, then this is absolutely one of the best possible phones you can buy. Particularly if you're already a Samsung user and know what you like, this is the kind of phone that will feel like a truly new and fresh experience, at least for a while. And if the compromises are few enough that you want to go for it, heck, I say why not? But for most of us, who might be interested in tech like this but unwilling to spend that money unless there's some genuine value there, even if maybe you could afford it if you really wanted to, no, I don't think this is the phone to buy, and that's totally okay. The Fold 7 is great, just not $2,000 great, not yet. But I'm comfortable saying that this is probably the greatest smartphone I've ever used in terms of both how advanced technology has become, as well as the unbridled ambition on display here. This phone has really impressed me, just not by enough to convince me to buy it over an iPhone, at least for the time being. And so with that, I think I'm right about done here. Big thanks again to Samsung for sending me this phone along with their Galaxy Watch, and as sad as I am to have to send them back, I did enjoy using them the last couple weeks for this review. Obviously this isn't sponsored, these are my honest and genuine opinions as an iPhone user, so if you're a Samsung user you might not agree with everything I said, and a lot of this was quite new to me, so I hope it all came across well, but I did really have a lot of fun using this phone, and if someone gave it to me for free permanently, I probably would consider switching over to it, at least for a month or something to try it out, but maybe that'll be another video for another time, who knows. Hopefully this video did help you out, or maybe you found it interesting, and if so, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tech content. We do have a Discord server with a great community if you want to stop by and say hi, and a huge shout out to the channel members, thank you guys so much for your support. And thank you all for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.